It's been a while, punk, but I think it's time for another fountain pen shootout. And today we'll be looking at two very similar pens from Kaweco. One I bought, one I got from Kaweco. Thanks. People requested a shootout, and I think it's completely obvious why, right? These pens are clearly highly related. The Student and the Allrounder. The Student is made of plastic, the Allrounder is made of aluminum. So this one may be a little bit more rugged, it's also a bit heavier. I could have put the same nibs on both, because I have, medium nibs, whatever. You can switch them out, I'll show you that later. I didn't, because then it would write exactly the same. So, you get a nice writing performance with both. I'm going to cover the parts of these pens very briefly. I have separate reviews of these two pens on my channel. You can check them out if you want to. Just adjusting my camera a bit, I was slightly tilted. I'll tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and then do a writing sample. And before I do the writing sample, I'll show you how to disassemble both pens. So let's start with the Student. Very simple, nicely tapered barrel. Finer, gets broader, then gets finer again. It's a nice translucent plastic. You can see the nib in there, you can see the converter in there. It's very dark, it's not extremely easy to see, but you can definitely see it. Get the nice clip with that curvature. Clip works fine. Get a section that's made of chrome, not plastic. Then you have the nib. Same nib you get in the Sport or on the Allrounder or this on this pen. So you can switch them out very easily. It takes Kaweco converter or just pretty much a bunch of other converters. This happens to be a Visconti converter, but that works well. I wonder whether this would make a good eyedropper filled pen. It is completely closed off at all ends, no holes or anything. But this is metal, right? So that may rust. It's not a big pen, but it's not extremely small either. And when you post it, you really have a decently sized pen. The Allrounder, pretty much the same model. You get that same taper, you have the same clip. Clip seems a little tighter on this pen, but it definitely works. On this one, you do get a section that's made of the same material as the pen body, which looks quite nice. And as I said, that's aluminum, so it's a bit tougher. You can unscrew this. This one has a Kaweco converter in there. Very pleasant pen to use. What I love with metal pens is that you can screw the barrel in place in one twist, as you can see there, which I think is just ridiculous but cool. And that's pretty much it. Now, the big difference, of course, the looks of the pen, clearly, they're both blue. I understand this one is lighter and this one's a bit darker, but the looks of the pen are very similar. So the question is, what's the difference? The difference is the weight. The Student uninked, I get 30 grams, and the Allrounder uninked, I get 40 grams. So it's about 10 grams heavier. And that's the difference. The nibs, as I said, if you would get the two of these in medium nibs, they would write exactly the same because they're exactly the same nib. The same model, same make. This one is lighter. So for those of you who like lighter pens, the Student is best. If you like a somewhat heavier pen, something with a bit more body, the Allrounder is great, just because it's made of aluminum and it's just a bit heavier. But in all, it's not like it's twice as heavy or anything, right? It's a fairly minor difference. So, they have the comparison. If you want more detail on either pen, I think you can check out my other reviews. As to size, they're pretty much the same size. The Allrounder is just a little bit bigger, and uncapped, I think the difference pretty much disappears. I really think they're maybe, a millimeter taller in the Allrounder or something, but that's all. So, I hope that comparison was useful. I'm going to show you how to disassemble the pens, that I'm inking them up, and then we'll do a writing sample. Hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Okay, so here we have the Student and the Allrounder. How exactly do you take them apart? Well, that's fairly easy, and it's done in the same way. So you uncap them clearly, unscrew the barrel. I always like to post them for easy storage. This is not actually a Kaweco converter. This is a Visconti converter, but that seems to fit very well onto the nipple of the section in there. Now, these sections are very easy to take apart. You put your thumb on the nib and you put the nib on your finger and you put your thumb on the feed, and then you can just unscrew the whole section, which is very useful because if you buy a Kaweco nib unit, this is what you'll get. You'll get a nib collar, a nib, and then a feed, and that's pretty much all. So here I have the broad nib, and if you want to switch that out, it's easiest to just unscrew this and put a whole different nib unit in. But if you want to, the nib and feed are friction fit, and you can also just pull out the nib and feed, and that means that in principle you could just leave the entire nib collar in the section and then just pull out the nib and feed and slide new ones in. But you know, that's not absolutely necessary. This is very useful if you want to adjust the nib for ink flow a bit, for example. The beauty is that the nib slides in place there, so it sort of slots in place on the feed. That means you get good alignment. And then you take your nib collar, and I always have the feeling that it doesn't really matter how you put the nib and feed back in there. I don't find a particular way. I don't think there's a slot for the nib, but I could be wrong, so check it out well on your pen. Once you are satisfied with the alignment of the nib and feed, which I am now, take your section, screw that back in place. There we go. You can put the... you know what, I'm just going to leave that open because I have to ink it up in a sec. And then you're done. And now for the Allrounder, it's an extremely similar process. So here I have one of the Kaweco converters. Let's start with that. Because these are really easy to disassemble, which is great if you want to clean them well, or if you got some ink behind the piston seal, for example. Just hold it like this. You see that metal ring? You can just unscrew that. It comes off, usually with the turning knob, which you can then push out. And then here you have three parts. You have the ink reservoir, you have this little plastic ring, and then you have the piston. Put a little bit of silicone grease on there and on the threads. Clean this out well, flush it out, dry it, whatever you like. And then when you're done, slide that back in there, slide the metal ring, the plastic ring on there. It has some teeth there, and there are some slots there, so you just slide in place until it lies flush with the plastic end. Then you take your turning knob, you screw that back on there, and you take your metal ring, you screw that in there, and then everything should operate nicely and smoothly. Okay, now as to the section, it's the exact same thing from the student. So, same procedure, hold the nib and feed, unscrew the section. You could also unscrew the nib and feed, but if you unscrew the section, you're less likely to disrupt the setting of the nib and feed, right? And as you can see, it's the exact same type of nib unit, black nib collar, nib and feed. You can just pull them out again. Same principle applies, same type of nibs, same types of feeds, same types of nib collar. And when you're done, you just slide them back in there, take your section, you slide them in, and once they're screwed in place, you're done. Now, for those of you who are interested, it is definitely possible to have some fun here, because you can screw the Allrounder feed into the student body. You'll have a bit of a gap there, but it's possible. I think the other way around was easier. Yes, so you can, if you don't like the Allrounder section, you can put on the student section. It fits perfectly well, and the cap will fit. Also, you can switch caps around to create all kinds of weird modular pens. It's all possible. Okay, now let's ink these up. I happen to have some Parker Quink here in a Delta bottle, but it's still Parker Quink. Student and Allrounder. I think we should do a writing sample. Okay, so writing with the Student and the Allrounder. I could have put a medium nib on the Allrounder, oh sorry, a broad nib on the Allrounder, then they would have had the exact same nibs, but then they would write exactly the same way, because medium nibs are medium nibs. And they have the exact same nibs, it's the same brand, right? I mean the same nib units, both this, what I call the Sport nib, because they are, you get them on the Kaweco Sport too. So I left the extra fine on this pen, and I put the broad on this pen, or the broad nib on this pen. What I'm going to be focusing on is the feeling of writing. Right? I have done extensive reviews of both pens, so if you want more information you can get them there. Get it there, but let's start. So you have the Student. This is broad. Okay, so when I write with this pen I feel that it is very light. As you can see, the ink is nice, wet, it flows well, and it's pleasant to use. It's very light. It's almost like I have no pen in my hands. I can almost not feel the weight, and it gets a little bit heavier when I post it, but then it's also a bit top heavy because the cap doesn't post very deeply, as you can see. Alright, then we have the Allrounder. In extra fine. The nib is a lot, Fox. The nib is a lot drier, but it's extra fine instead of broad. I have experienced some startup issues with this pen. Right now things seem to be pretty much okay. I don't know whether it was the ink that I used earlier. This is the same Rhodia paper I used with the review. When it comes to wetness, I don't think fast writing really... well, you know, let's do some fast writing. Who cares? You can see it's nice, wet, works well. No skips there too, it works well, performs well, that's great. Let's check out the wetness of the pen. I think this is where you're really going to see a difference. For an extra fine, I think this pen really lays down a nice amount of ink. I mean, this is a pretty wet thing. And in the broad, that's only more pronounced. You really get a puddle of ink on the paper, which is very, very nice and wet. Now, as I said, you can get these nib units fairly easily. You can swap them out. You can swap them out with these two pens, so you can make the Allrounder write this broad and this wet, because it's such a nice modular system where it's very easy to switch nibs. Now, as to flexibility, I think that's the last thing we will have to assess here. They're not advertised as flex nibs. You can squeeze out some line variation, but it's not very easy. They are steel nibs. You see it probably a bit more pronounced in this extra fine nib, that you really can get some line variation. Reverse writing is almost impossible with this nib, I think. Especially with the extra fine. I seem to remember that with the broad, yeah, somewhat better ink flow, but even there it's very dry and very scratchy, so these are not the types of pens you probably want to use the other way around. And that's pretty much all there's to it, so I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.